Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax, and this is The Story. Our guest today is author Melanie Saward, who's joining us from her home in Brisbane. Melanie is the author of the book Ministry Stinks, One Leader's Journey from Despair to Joy, and also Disillusioned, When We Get Lost Following Jesus. Before the break, Melanie was sharing what it was like growing up in a home with Hindu parents while attending a Christian school and growing in her new Christian faith. Now, here's more of Melanie's story.
I think my parents knew that I wasn't a Hindu, but I certainly did have to follow the traditions because if we were going to temple, for instance, I couldn't say, no, I'm not coming. Or if we had a prayer ceremony at home, I couldn't say no, that was their home. They held that. But, you know, there was a point I got to where I did make a decision that Jesus was the way and that was the faith that I was living out and that I didn't believe that Hinduism was the way. It's quite a sort of, I shouldn't say funny story because it certainly wasn't funny at the time, but well, I was getting really passionate about my faith because I was 19 years old, I was in a church service, and I have this major epiphany in the middle of the service that God is real. And it's like this massive, light bulb went off in my head of, oh, wow, like he's not some figment of my imagination. Like it's not like I'm just talking to myself when I pray. Like he's actually real and he can hear me and he interacts with us. And so that was a huge revelation. And on the back of that, I started to become really passionate about my faith. And on this Sunday night, I can remember they were preaching a sermon about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I was thinking, oh, wow, I didn't think about it in terms of how it fit into my life in practice, but I was like, oh, wow, that really stirred something in me. And then the next day, my mum sort of goes, oh, we're going to go to the temple today, and your aunties are coming along and whatnot. Anyway, we turn up to the temple, and I'm just standing outside the temple going, oh no, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, I can't do this. I actually can't do this anymore. And, so my mum comes to the back of the temple and says to me, oh, aren't you going to come? And I said, oh, I can't do this. And it was in front of her sisters, which was terribly, brought, a bit of shame to her. And I was like, oh, I should have thought about this before this all happened. But anyway, and then the following Sunday, I'm getting praised at church for that. But behind the scenes in my own family, I'm getting not persecuted, because persecuted is too strong a word, but I certainly was getting treated with some rejection and they weren't happy with me about what had happened. So,
well, you were going against the family tradition.
I was. And before then, I was able to continue having this faith, but it not be offensive to them. So this was the point at which it became offensive because I was doing something that was actually like, sorry, I'm not going to do the stuff that you've always had me do. So anyway, so that was kind of a big moment. And, it took a long time actually to repair some of the relationship with my parents around that.
That had to be hard. I mean, you want to honor your mother and father, but they're asking you to do something that you no longer had a conviction to do, and you wanted to grow in your new faith. So it just had to be a hard situation. Oh,
absolutely. And I am certainly very passionate about honouring, especially my parents. And, I've always taken a significant amount of space in each of the books that I've written to actually really say how much I honour my parents, because they're actually really good people and they've been fantastic parents to me. And to be fair to them, I'd never given them the expectation that I would ever resist before then. So it was probably the surprise of it that was
a bit of a shock, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was exactly. It was a bit of a shock. And so then they had to go through this whole journey of, are we okay with this whole thing, with her going to church and her being so radical? And I was a young adult. I was like 18, 19 and completely immature still. So I probably didn't really work out how much I needed to repair the relationship with my parents until I moved up to Brisbane. And since then, our relationships have been really great. And they're able to respect what I'm doing, and I respect the choices that they make also. So, yes, but it certainly has been tough. Yeah, it's certainly an interesting tightrope to walk on, to figure out how to honour your parents but still be able to say that, well, that's not what I'm going to do.
Yeah. So that was as a young adult, and then eventually you go on to ministry. Tell us about that.
Yes. Yeah, so it was a good 10 years later. I probably thought that I was called to ministry long before that. I felt like was really passionate about people in their faith, and actually the decision to really go all in for Jesus and pass away from the things that I'd been living in terms of Hinduism probably actually made me more passionate, because I had this audience now that were watching me when it came to my faith, and I wanted to show them that Jesus was the real deal.
Well, when you say an audience, who are you referring to?
My family, not just my immediate family. I had cousins and aunties and uncles and everything. So, I'd often go to family get-togethers, and someone would say something that would make me the subject of conversation in terms of my faith. Yeah. And I would have to answer all these questions about how, it was really quite strange. Like I'd often be like, what? I mean, why are they asking me this right now in front of everyone? But that's just how it was, and I kind of got used to that. So it just meant that my convictions were stronger, because there was people watching to see whether or not this faith was real that I had, and so it had to be real. I couldn't fake it. I had to be real about it. Anyway, so fast forward 10 years later, I had been working in counselling and actually helping people with injuries, like returning to work and all that kind of stuff. And I basically was at church one day, and this was just after I'd had my daughter, so she's probably about 6 months old by the time. I had been having this whole feeling of, is this it? Like, I just go to work each day and I feel like I've got to do more than this. I want to do more. And, I'd sort of realised that, there might be some kind of internal transition going on, like there was something prompting me to want to change. And so I'm at church one day, and they're announcing the internship program at the church. And, it was like that light bulb moment again. Oh, wow, is this what you want me to do, God? I should do this internship program. And so, as a family, we reshuffled life so that I basically changed my job so that I didn't have to work as many days, so I could still have enough time with my daughter. And, basically the next year I'm doing the internship. And then the internship was like a total adventure, because it's very humbling to have gone from working like 10 years in corporate industry to like cutting vegetables and fruit for, a creative night. So it was very humbling. It was very humbling. The first few days I was cutting those vegetables and I'm going, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And then by the fifth day I was like, come on, Mel, just remember that it's like worship. Like, this is your worship to God, right? So you don't do it for people, you do it for God. Anyway, so I came to terms with all that. But by the end of the year, I kind of felt like I'm going to end up working here. I could kind of feel it. And of course, 2 weeks later, I'm getting pulled into one of the offices and saying, hey, would you like to work for us? You could, basically I was going to be working sort of split role. So I'd do a couple of days in the creative team and then a couple of days in the Connect Groups team, which is small groups. And I was like, oh, yes, like, absolutely, I'm going to be doing something for God, That's how I perceived it. For some reason, before then, I didn't think I was doing something for God. But as soon as you say church ministry, you feel like, oh, I'm finally doing something for God, which is not the right attitude, of course. But anyway, I started working there, and the first 6 months were like bliss. It was so amazing. I was like, doing all these creative things and being able to come up with ideas and just being a part of the team, and I loved it. And then by 6 months, we had this event that was happening at our church, and I was kind of one of the key people that was organising the actual items. And the Sunday morning after the event, I'm walking out the house, and my daughter, who by that time is probably almost 2 years old, is running to the door saying, Mummy, don't leave me. And I just went, I closed the front door and I stood at the door for about 5 seconds just going, what are you doing, Mel? Like, this is not good. You've never heard those kind of words come out of your daughter's mouth before, and it's not really something I would ever want to hear. Do you know, like, for whatever reason, she might have only been 2, but she's clearly perceiving that I'm not here for her as much as she thinks.
Oh, that must have really cut deep.
Oh, it was awful. I think I was in the pastor that I was reporting to at the time, like, I was in her office almost every day just crying, just going, I can't do this. Like, if this is the pace I've got to do it at, I don't think I can actually do this job. I don't know how I'm going to be there for my 2-year-old child. And, there was a lot of other staff members that had kids, but the women that were on staff that had kids, most of their kids were probably later primary sort of age to high schoolers. They didn't have kids that were still in nappies, and they were trying to work out, all of that kind of stuff. So I was the only one, and I felt very isolated because of that.
So were you full-time?
Almost. I was about 4 days a week.
Okay. So a lot of hours.
A lot of hours, a lot of nights as well. Like when you're in it and you're loving it, you don't actually think about how that probably isn't great for your family. But at the time was just so loving it, and my husband and I just kept, working together to make it happen. But then I hit that 6 months and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I don't know how I'm going to do this. And so like I actually talk about it a fair bit in the first book that I wrote because...
Yeah, I was going to say the first book is called Ministry Stinks, One Leader's Journey from Despair to Joy. So I'm assuming this is the despair part.
This is the first despair that I probably
experienced. Oh, there's more despair to come.
Yeah, well, there was different things at different times, of course, but that one was more about me and my capacity to do this. Like how was I, as a young mum with a young child, going to manage the responsibility I was, and and a husband whose work was completely exploding at the time as well. And mentally I went really downhill like really quickly. And so I didn't know, I had kind of given up my career thinking I was going to work in a church, and I'm sitting there kind of going, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like I've given it all up and I don't really know if I can do this. And I remember we had a conference that was coming up, and I basically said to God, like you make these little deals with God, right? I said to God just before the conference, unless something amazing or something so clear happens to me in the conference, I'm coming back from this conference and I'm going to quit. And this was only after 6 months, which is like a rule for me. I hardly ever quit any jobs on such a short length of time in the job, right? But, of course, I went to the conference and something happened. I was, in worship, and I can't even really remember the specifics, but something was said on stage and it spoke exactly to what my situation was. And, the waterworks happened, and I sat down and started writing down, what are you saying, God? This is what you want. And basically got this impression that I am where I am supposed to be right now, but I've got to learn better ways to do this. And then hence I had to come back. So I came back to the office the following week and I went, okay, this is obviously where I'm supposed to be. I now need to make a plan for how I'm going to manage this. And then, obviously for the following 4 or 5 years of ministry, I, essentially stuck to that plan to make sure that I was giving enough time to my family, having enough time for myself, having enough time even for your relationship with God, because sometimes, the whole Sabbath thing gets thrown out the window when you're like got so much going on. Yeah. And that's how I survived. And then, it became a thing where I was learning more and more how to handle the stress of it.
Well, that was part one of Eric Scadabow's chat with Melanie Saward, who's the author of the book Ministry Stinks, One Leader's Journey from Despair to Joy, and also the book Disillusioned, When One Gets Lost Following Jesus. So, as you can probably tell from those titles, that Melanie has encountered some bumps along the way in her faith journey. So, we invite you to join us again next time to hear more of her story and more about those bumps she's experienced in life. It's all coming up next time. Meanwhile, if you'd like to learn more about Melanie and her books, her website is meljsaward.com. That's meljsaward, SAWARD.com. Finally, a verse that comes to mind when reflecting on Melanie's story so far is John chapter 8, verse 32, where Jesus says, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." As we've heard, Melanie grew up a little bit confused in her childhood, growing up with two very different worldviews, one at home and the other at school. And at times, she was not always sure which worldview was which, but eventually, the truth set her free. Now, that's not to say she hadn't had any challenges, as we'll continue to hear, but overall, she's grown in her faith in Jesus, which is the foundation of her life. Well, until next time when we'll hear part 2 of Melanie's story, I'm Jimmy Colefax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
Basically, all of a sudden, there was like a conflict that occurred at our church, and the world just completely changed for the next maybe 4 months, and then trying to continue to lead people who were also going through a lot, wondering and asking questions as to why everything had happened the way it had. So it was a very tough time.
Melanie Saward is the author of the book Ministry Stinks, One Leader's Journey from Despair to Joy, and also Disillusioned, When You Get Lost Following Jesus. So, as you can probably tell from those titles, that Melanie has encountered some bumps along the way of her faith journey. We'll find out what those bumps were all about as Melanie continues to share her story next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is connecting faith to life.